Yes, I'm an attorney, and 2, I'm from Washington, D.C. Please don't throw anything at me. But it's a real pleasure to be here. Biomass power is sort of a bit of a passion of mine. It's something I'm trying to focus on a great deal. I think it has tremendous potential, but it faces, unfortunately, tremendous challenges right now. And I've been particularly fascinated with biomass development in the Mountain West and in the Southwest, where these are regions that typically are not where biomass has been utilized for energy use, including for power. I mean, historically, it's been in New England and California, and in the Southeast is starting to come along as well. 3 years ago, I do a lot of work, for instance, for a large biomass plant in Arizona that relies on a lot of fuel from forest residue from the national forests nearby. 3 years ago, I didn't realize there were forests in Arizona. And now I know that Arizona just had their largest wildfire in state history just this past summer, which was hugely devastating. And you can really see the difference between where they haven't been actively managing the forest and where they've gone in with appropriate thinning activities, that the level of damage was significantly reduced, the amount of emissions from the wildfire and the air were reduced, and the risks of homes catching fire reduced. And that's something I'm hoping that we can do more of in the West, of trying to get this symbiotic relationship between good forest management practices and energy usage. But the big question, or at least in my mind, is how can we make that profitable? Private developers are not going to build large-scale energy projects just to help, work with the Forest Service to improve forest management practices. It's got to be profitable, and this is, in the current day and age, is extremely challenging. My presentation is going to focus again on biopower, biomass power projects, mainly large utility scale, but keep in mind that a lot of these are combined heat and power projects. Dr. O'Loughlin, in his presentation, did a great job of identifying many of the different ways that biomass can be converted into energy. And most large biomass power plants in the U.S. are combined heat and power. They're often co-located with a paper mill or another industrial process where the heat is used for the industrial processes, and that helps keep the efficiency up. So with that, just a little bit, Ballard, Spahr, we're a national law firm. I'm located in the D.C. office, but we have a very strong focus in the West and Southwest, including a large office here in Salt Lake City. The way I look at it, there's sort of 3 big questions in terms of making biomass power on a large scale successful. One is, can your project generate electricity at a competitive price? 2, is there enough of the biomass fuel nearby that you can sustain a project for a good 20, 30 years. This is what developers are looking for in order to know that their project can be profitable. And I focused here on pinyon and juniper because that's what a big issue is here in Utah, I know, in the southern part of the state as well, of too much of it growing and encroaching in new areas. And 3, to what extent could the state of Utah or the federal government develop or maintain policies that encourage biomass material to generate electricity, including pinyon and juniper? And these are all, unfortunately, right now, the answers to all 3 of these questions are a little bit depressing in my mind. Despite the strong need to get rid of this extra fuel in the forest and to improve forest management practices. Now, biomass power has a number of natural advantages over other forms of renewable energy. It can provide consistent baseload generation. As Dr. O'Loughlin mentioned, it's not an intermittent resource like solar or wind. Utility grid operators really like biomass for that aspect. It's very predictable. It's a proven technology. A lot of people are now trying to make sort of next generation biomass plants and gasification plants, and hopefully a lot of these technologies will work. But even if they don't, an old-fashioned biomass boiler is nothing that complicated. Biomass power, although it can be expensive, it is competitive in comparison to a number of other renewable energy sources, particularly wind and solar. But again, it can vary greatly on location. And as I think a lot of people sort of hit on, in my mind, it's the only generation type that can actually be used to help improve land quality. And it's certainly cleaner than coal, which is going to be running into a lot of challenges, especially with new regulations that the EPA has already issued and is on the tailoring rule and stuff. That's in a lot of heated debate as to where that's actually going. But unfortunately, biomass power has a lot of disadvantages. Right now, natural gas, we're seeing in the U.S. a huge boom in natural gas development. Back east in Pennsylvania, the Marcellus Shale is becoming a huge source of natural gas in the U.S., and Utah is actually poised to provide a lot as well. This new shale gas, these are relatively new discoveries that were gas that's under, locked under shale that wasn't recoverable until recently with fracking, which is a very controversial practice, but nevertheless accesses a tremendous amount of natural gas. Natural gas is a very large component of fuel for our electricity generation in the U.S. And when natural gas availability goes up and its price goes down, generally electricity prices go down as well. Yet at the same time, gasoline prices are fairly high. Not as high as they have been, but they're pretty robust. And that can put a real squeeze on biomass projects because so much of the fuel you have to truck in from long distances. Where exactly the EPA's air emission regulations are going is hard to be seen, to what extent that ultimately helps or hurts biomass. They seem to be trying to take in recent announcements a more favorable look towards biomass, but that remains to be seen. And with any individual project, the three keys of real estate: location, location, location. Is your project located in close proximity to a sufficient amount of biomass material? I hate to throw up numbers to try to estimate how much it costs to generate electricity from biomass power, but everyone wants to know, including myself. And I always get numbers from different locations, and they're never very reliable, but let's throw some up anyway. This is information from the Energy Information Administration that they recently put out. Take these with a grain of salt, but nevertheless, I think they're instructive. This is for estimates for biomass projects if you were to build one and place one in service in 2016. They're talking about a little over $112 a megawatt hour. Compare that with wind that they estimate $96, solar $211, geothermal $99.8, and then look at natural gas, somewhere in the mid-60s. So, compared to other renewable energy sources, it doesn't pan out that biomass could be fairly competitive. And when you take into account its operational advantages over wind and solar, that's something a utility might be willing to pay a bit of a premium for. But when you get down to the bottom line of what's most commonly built in this day and age when there's a rise in demand for electricity is a traditional combined cycle natural gas plant, and you can drop that in for about half the cost. I wanted to sort of highlight a little bit right now what's going on in power prices in the West right now. Just a little bit, I don't have specific numbers for Utah, but I do have numbers on some of the big trading hubs throughout the West, and we can see sort of where electricity prices have been in the last few years and where they are right now. So just for a little background, I'm going to go over a couple of the big trading hubs. There's Mid-Columbia up in the state of Washington, California-Oregon border, or COB. In California, power traded at NP15, that's north of Path 15, that's referring to a particular transmission line that runs roughly in the middle of the state, and south of Path 15, or SP15, and in the southwest, Meade in Nevada, Palo Verde, where the large Palo Verde nuclear plant is in Arizona, and Four Corners in New Mexico, where there's the large coal plants there. So taking a look at these different areas, let's take a look at, I apologize, this might be a little bit hard to read from a distance, but if you look in the little graph in the top corner, going from 2006 through 2011. You can see in 2006 prices, this is now looking at sort of the Northwest and Northern California, so mid-Columbia, California-Oregon border, and north of Path 15. The prices have varied, sort of starting around $60 a megawatt hour, spiking up in 2007, getting as high as $90 a megawatt hour, jumping back down, running right up through 2008, getting as high in Northern California as above $100 a megawatt hour. And then, I don't know, I'm not sure, something must have happened in 2008. I don't, does any, you know, because prices suddenly plummet. But, you know, I'm being facetious or trying to be, but, you know, the economy cratered with the credit crisis of September of 2008, and you can see sort of a close relation, the economy getting in the doldrums and power prices dropping way down to close to $20 a megawatt hour. And you can see here on the big graph, just going through this past year, the price is never really going much above $50 a megawatt hour. You can take a look at the red representing mid-Columbia. Those prices get really low. Does, you know, anyone know why that is? Hydro, yes, hydro. I think that's right. You know, hydro prices, when there's a lot of water available, those prices go down. You've got a bad economy, plus particularly, you know, I mean, I believe this last winter was record-setting in snowpack in a lot of places. So you have a tremendous amount of water resource available. So hydro was at at particularly low levels. Looking in the Southwest, a little less variability, but you see the same basic picture. You know, the economy was doing pretty well leading up to 2008. You know, so power prices tended to spike up. Things really climbing up in 2008, and then suddenly, about two-thirds, three-quarters of the way in 2008, it, you know, miraculously drops tremendously. So you can see, looking back at this, if you're wanting to build a biomass power plant and setting aside issues of subsidies or renewable portfolio standards, just sort of what's the going rate for day-ahead power, you know, in some of these years, prices are getting high enough you can say biomass could be pretty competitive. But looking through 2010, 2011, not really. Here's just going through August. I thought this was interesting just to see it in a little more detail. August is a month, although I guess in the Northwest, prices tend not to spike as much in August. But, you know, so the most recent, these are pretty low numbers. You know, you're talking about $30 a megawatt hour. So, you know, going back to that first slide, that's like a fourth of what estimated biomass power project might, a newly built one might be able to produce. Southwest about the same. So the federal government has implemented several key incentives to encourage the development of renewable energy projects, you know, power generation projects that have been very helpful to help make them more competitive. There's two key tax credit provisions and one grant in lieu of tax credit. So there's what's called the investment tax credit, or ITC. There's a production tax credit, or the PTC. Investment tax credit is one where you can get a credit on roughly 30% of the cost for building certain renewable energy projects. Production tax credit is, instead of taking the ITC, you get a tax credit based on each megawatt hour of power you produce. So it works better for certain technologies than others, depending on how productive you think your project's going to be. And then in the stimulus bill in early 2009, they added a new program called the Treasury Grant in lieu of tax credit. They did this because there were so few renewable energy project developers had the tax appetite to be able to take full advantage of a tax credit, because no one was making any money, that they said you could take the ITC as a grant. So you build a project and the federal government will cut you a check for roughly 30% of the cost for building that project. The problem is all of these are slated to expire pretty soon. I've got in bold sort of the open loop biomass, closed loop biomass. I guess here we're most interested in open loop. For the Treasury grant, you need to commence construction by the end of this calendar year, and you need to have it completed and in commercial operation by the end of 2013. So if you are interested in building one and haven't started already, you should leave my presentation right now and go do it. Another useful federal policy, Dr. O'Loughlin spoke on this a little bit, is the Farm Bill. We talked about that in the 2002 Farm Bill. Congress created a whole new energy title that was geared specifically to generate energy production in rural and agricultural communities in the U.S. So when you look at the Farm Bill as a whole, that's really quite new. It's really sort of the newest title of the bill. And it includes several programs that are particularly helpful. The Rural Energy for America program is one where you can get loan guarantees, usually up to $25 million, to build a renewable energy project in a rural area. The Biomass Crop Assistance Program, that actually was created much more recently. It was added to the 2008 Farm Bill. Is anyone here familiar with BCAP, the Biomass Crop Assistance Program? Okay. And that's had a great history and has been super successful, right? Right, no. So it's been very frustrating because it includes two components. One is a matching payments component where if you're removing certain types of woody biomass forest residue from, it could be national forests, you can get, when you deliver it to a biomass conversion facility, you can get matching payments for that for up to 2 years. And then there's a separate program geared towards dedicated energy crops. And what happened was in early 2009, because the economy was so bad, the Obama administration ordered USDA to roll this program out ASAP. And so USDA didn't create, carefully crafted regulations. They just sort of issued very basic guidelines. And the program ended up costing twice as much as people expected, and it didn't incentivize the right people, and Congress got very upset about that. So they shut it down, created new regulations, finalized those in October of 2010. But the first go-around with BCAP got such bad press that anything USDA has done to fix the program is falling a bit on deaf ears. So, when Congress is now looking to cut the budget, that's one of the things a lot of congressmen looks at. Oh, yeah, that program that cost twice as much as we thought it would, and it went to a bunch of paper companies that were doing the same thing anyway. So, so that's frustrating. The problem is these tax incentives and these subsidies that can be so helpful for building renewable energy projects, including biomass projects, their chance of survival in the current political climate is uncertainty. Right now we've got the super committee that's tasked to cut $1.2 trillion. I think it's $1.5 trillion if you count the interest. There's an estimated $500 billion to $700 billion in low-hanging fruit that apparently everyone can agree to. I don't know why they didn't cut it sooner, but that leaves roughly that same amount that's hard, and there's a good chance that they'll go after programs that help renewable energy projects, including biomass. The other issue is whether Congress will pursue major corporate tax reform. Even outside the super committee process, there's a lot of talk about trying to get the corporate tax rate down. And to do that, what some experts have said, you'd basically have to remove every single corporate tax loophole in the code to do that. So that would include getting rid of the investment tax credit, production tax credit, things I talked about earlier. So it's not looking good for federal incentives for renewable energy and biomass power. Nevertheless, the states often do things to help out. There's renewable portfolio standards. These can be very helpful. I gave sort of a little survey of the ones around the West. You've got some very aggressive ones in the West. Utah, I've got an orange because it's not so much a requirement as it's I guess people call it a renewable portfolio suggestion. It was so the Rocky Mountain Power is supposed to by 2025 get up at least 20% of their electric generation from renewable sources, but if they don't, nothing bad really happens. So there's not the real strong incentive in Utah there is in other states. Now, fortunately, projects in Utah could take advantage of renewable portfolio standards in other states, exporting the power there, including California. But right now, with the economy in bad shape, the demand for power is depressed right now, and so the utilities, very few of the utilities out there are looking to get more renewable power right now. Looking down the road 4 or 5 years from now, that could very well change, but right now it's kind of a tough time with that. So, what are our policy options? Again, getting back to how can we make biomass power profitable? And I've divided up in sort of 4 different policy ways you can target this. One is implementing policies that increase the demand for electricity from all renewable energy sources, such as getting the state of Utah to implement an RPS, getting Congress to implement a federal renewable portfolio standard or clean energy standard that could increase the demand for renewable energy. That would increase the prices utilities would be willing to pay for that. There's also implementing policies to make it easier to finance projects. In Congress, there's legislation that actually passed the Senate Energy and Natural Resources Committee this summer to create a type of clean energy bank. Or you can get more specific to what we're concerned about here is trying to continue those policies that recognize the environmental benefits of removing biomass material that needs to be removed in order to improve the health of the forest and reduce forest fire risks. Something like BCAP, which unfortunately hasn't been very successful, or something better that we could come up with. Or simply, to get to give the Forest Service a large enough budget that they can really come in and pay the private sector to come and remove this material. It's just not quite at the point where energy producers are willing to pay large sums of money to come remove this woody biomass to use for energy when prices are so low right now. One of the nice things about trying to do it in a way from sort of increasing the Forest Service budget and actually paying for the removal of these materials is it would have less of an impact on people's electricity prices. The renewable portfolio standards, other things that increase the demand. Looking back at this, so a lot of what I'm sort of lamenting is the fact that the price of electricity is low. Personally, I'm not wishing electricity prices to jump. I've got to pay them too. I don't want a large electricity bill. But we do need to reflect back on the incentives we have and to change the policy in a way that recognizes the environmental benefits of removing some of this biomass from the western forests. And we just don't, as in Dr. O'Loughlin touched on this earlier, we just don't quite have those policies in place yet. So those were the main points I wanted to make. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have.
Questions or comments for Dan? Going once?
Oh, I think great.
Do you have one?
Right back there.
Go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. Since you're in D.C. and a lot of us aren't, unfortunately. What is your feeling? I do go to D.C. and do some work every now and then, and it feels like even extending existing tax credits, the ITC and the PTC you mentioned in particular, are viewed, at least on the House side, as new spending. And so what are the realistic chances of us actually doing anything to help those particular cases before the general election?
Yeah, after making a lot of bad predictions, I've given up on predicting on Congress. Fortunately, I'm not alone on that. I don't know. What some of my lobbyist friends and contacts, particularly ones in the renewable energy industry, have said is that the 1603 Treasury grant program has been very popular, and although there is the environment right now is one pushing for dramatic cuts and trying to meet these goals of the super committee from the debt ceiling limit, they're cautiously optimistic that maybe something like some form of the production tax credit, investment tax credit in the 1603 grant program could survive. But I think it's incredibly unpredictable. I talked to the lobbyists I talked to say, the the environment in Congress is truly different than it's ever been before. And there were things that just a few years ago you could make certain predictions on this is how things work and this is how things will likely result, and people are just mystified. They don't know.
Any more comments or questions for Dan? One more, go ahead.
Yeah, back to the electric car thing again. You know, this is a new use. And I believe right now we are paying probably about 11 cents a mile for gasoline. Do you believe that we can generate power to recharge batteries at a lesser rate?
I do. I'm very optimistic about electric car batteries in the future. I think it could be a tremendous win for our energy stability and the environment. Dr. Laughlin was right that right now a tremendous amount of electricity we generate is from coal. So we do need to be careful if we're talking about for environmental benefits, where that comes from. But at least in terms of energy security and the cost of energy, the more they get the cost of those batteries down, the more it can really be a win-win for everybody. And a byproduct of that may be increased electricity prices, which then suddenly makes a lot of these renewable resources, including biomass, more competitive and easier to get those done. Switching over, our automobile fleet, switching over even just a small percentage to electricity could make a big difference in electricity demand, and then hence the demand of renewable energy sources.
Okay, we're out of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.